Welcome to my channel. Hi everybody, welcome to my channel and welcome to day 25 of Vlogmas 2025. Yeah, I made it to day 25 and Merry Christmas everybody. Today is Christmas Day. Wanted to wish you all a wonderful holiday. Hopefully a lot of you will have an extended holiday, and I hope that they are very happy and just the way that you want them to be, and hopefully they'll also turn out to be exactly what you had hoped for it. I have been actually thinking of some of the angel stories that I recently told you, and it's unbelievable how these stories come to life once you start talking about them and thinking about them. And I have a few other stories from my past that, to me at least, they seem incredible, just like other angel stories are. I thought I would just first stop off and have myself a nice holiday coffee, and then we'll get into this story. I thought I would just first stop off and have myself a nice holiday coffee, and then we'll get into this story. I'm trying the very delicious smelling peppermint mocha, and I hope it's not too sweet. Let's have a try. It's just wonderful, and no, it's not that sweet, so I'm going to love this. I shouldn't be having it, but I'm going to. This tastes so amazing. Yes, there's a lot of added calories in that cream there, but it's Christmas. This first story is actually related to the context of the last story time that I told you, and it is in the year following my father's passing. And again, my mom and I were confronted with the situation of travel, and as usual, my mother was very skeptical and very I don't know how to say. She was not looking forward to the trip. It would be a trip across Europe, across the very many beautiful countries of Europe, probably 5 of them. And it is a tour that my mother never would have embarked on had it not been for my dad's ex-business partner. And so what happened was that he began to suggest very aggressively that we go on this trip, and it would be a trip hosted by my late father's tour company, and the buses, we would be flying down, and the buses would be taking us to France, Spain, Portugal, and Italy. And so my mother was not into that. I was very excited and happy and would jump at the chance, but I did not think that I would go without her. And so I would only go on the trip if my mother would eventually consent. And so eventually consent she did, with great big misgivings, because she wasn't a keen traveler, especially without my dad. It was very painful for her to travel without my dad. And so I understood that completely. It would be a very beautiful and well-organized pilgrimage throughout these fabulous countries that I had always dreamed of seeing. Of course, I'd been to Italy quite a few times, but I'm talking about the other few countries, and especially France. I could not wait to see France. I thought I would start off the first story by just explaining that it comes from the same context as my last story time, which was a while ago. And as you know, my mom and I my late mother and I had some struggles after the passing of my father due to certain conditions of the way things were left. And so we were still undergoing that difficulty with this specific person for quite some time, for at least a year or so, before anything actually ever changed. And so approximately 9-10 months after my father passed away, my mother and I again became involved in certain travel plans. This time the plans were more clearly suggested and not so much demanded, but it began to become very clear that we were excited to go on this trip. And at one point, my mother had so many amazing things packed that I was pleasantly surprised. And so our journey would be one across Europe, the many beautiful different countries that I never saw, as well as one that I was quite familiar with, my beloved Italy, the birthplace of both my parents. And we would also be journeying through France, Spain, and Portugal. Portugal being the first on the itinerary. And so it was to be a bus tour, a wonderful, amazing bus tour, taken with the travel agents handpicked from my dad's branches, the business partners' branches. And so about 3 very nice ones came along with us on that trip to manage the group. My father's tour company that put it together, a tour company that was on its way out because of the existing contract had not expired fully yet, so it was still in operation. And so my mother and I absolutely were looking forward to this trip because we would also get to see my dad's family once we arrived in certain parts of Italy. And from the very early step on, we understood that it would be a spiritual trip, a spiritual journey, a pilgrimage of sorts that would be interwoven, a beautiful theme that would be interwoven through all the different countries, a trip that would probably help my mother and I bridge that gap of remoteness and distance that we now felt with my late father. I knew it would be a very pleasant trip because I had heard so much about it from other passengers who came to praise us at the office and saying that they had an amazing time, that it was wonderful, and it was a highly recommended trip for anyone, all ages, all kinds of groups, all people, all around. And so even though my mother did have a few misgivings due to certain health conditions that usually popped up when she was nervous and excited about anything. And lo and behold, just a few days prior to our leaving, my mother was bitten by an insect, just like I was in 2016 before I went to Italy. And she required some medication, and she developed a sort of a bladder infection that kind of progressively got worse. But it did not, her insurance did not permit her to cancel under that condition. And so she would end up losing approximately $5 or $6 grand. And we figured, since we were consoled by the idea that we could leave the group at any time and turn around to return home whenever we felt the need, my mother moved forward with that consoling thought. And so that's how we began the trip. On the evening before we left my city, I had the most weird and strange dream. And you know me and my dreams, don't you? I had a very unusual dream that showed me various scenes of a very old, kind of a stone house. And it was weird because it was in black and white. So that told me that it was, in my symbolic language, the way that I comprehend it, that it was an old but very important site. And it was a house that I'd never seen before, I was unfamiliar with, and I let it go at that. Popped in and out of my dreams throughout the night. And I remember also, it was almost disturbing, guys. I had a dream about my father tapping me on the shoulder. And I remember thinking in my dream, wow, the trip really worked. It was a strange thought to think, but yes, I turned around and there was my father standing there with his eyes very wide open, and almost as though he were trying to look alive or trying to do something for me, but he really couldn't do much. I'm stuck on that. I'm still stuck on that. Can't figure that part out. After he tapped me on the shoulder, I remember it was in an elevator. Very symbolic. And I believe that the elevator at that point was stopped between floors. And I believe that I got on the elevator and I didn't see him behind me. But when I turned around, he told me, "Be careful, watch out." And then the scene faded away. It was disturbing to me. Guys, at that point, I understood even more clearly that the trip would be very much based around my father, my dad, and his family and family members, and situations involving my late father. And so we got to Fatima, and that was our first stop. And guys, I fell in love with it. I was enchanted by that little village on top of the mountains, and I felt immediately drawn to the culture and the people. And I know it was a tourist destination as well, but I don't know how to explain the feeling that overcame me. Was quite unlike anything I'd ever experienced before, and it was without anything ever even happening. It was immediate. As soon as we set foot in Fatima and it began to rain, a pattern which would follow us all throughout Italy. As soon as we touched base in a city, the sun would cloud over and rain would start. And it was kind of sad in a way, but I think it was very symbolic, almost as though somebody was trying to tell me something. I don't know. Don't forget, this is real life now. On the first night that we had this wonderful and amazing procession with hand-lit candles and a beautiful gourmet dinner. I forget if it was a buffet. I know that we were all sitting down, but the food, my God, guys. And I never ate in those days. I fell in love with the Portuguese food. Delicious and tantalizing cutlets you would ever imagine. Okay, enough of that. So the next day, it's kind of gray and drab and drizzly. And my mother... I felt bad for her because she was having issues with her bladder infection. No pain, but she was uncomfortable on the bus that shook and jambled all throughout our way. And she always had the sensation that she needed to go to the bathroom, which there was a bathroom in the bus, but it was very uncomfortable. At certain points, there was, the bathroom was inoperable, and I don't know why we were told that there was a bathroom on the bus when a lot of the time there wasn't. And so, anyway, it was very stressful. My mother wanted to turn around and go home that morning, but the girls from the office came in and consoled her. And she was all right. She was all right if she didn't have to walk a great distance. And on the days that we did walk great distances, my mother sat in a bus with some other older people, and she was okay. But that day, guys, that first morning, it was the whole package. The rain, the mist. I took so many pictures that never turned out, which is typical of that destination. But when it happens to you, it's weird. I don't care what anybody says. And you want to know something incredible? We went to see the home, two homes actually, not too far from each other, of Lucia and her two younger cousins who all grew up together, and those three children who claimed to have seen the apparition of Virgin Mary. And it was an incredible story, guys. And I remember walking through the village, and when I finally stopped in front of the place where the tour guide set his chair, and he would give us a speech, I was amazed. You wouldn't believe what I saw. Well, it was a house from my dream. The same house. The same house. Now, I was seeing it in vivid color. Boy, did that spook me. Couldn't believe what I was seeing. And so it automatically became even more clear to me that my father's communication to me in the dream was important. It held a really significant message in it. A message that at that time I grasped and I frantically searched to understand but couldn't. It was too soon for me to understand the real meaning of my father's request to be careful. As the story goes, the three children were visited many times by this blessed apparition, the Holy Mother Mary, and she disclosed secrets to them. She foretold the future to them. She guided them. Actually, she was a spiritual light to them, and they were quite burdened with all that superior knowledge. And so, however, as it goes, the two younger children, the brother and sister, passed away in childhood of the Spanish flu, the great influenza that globally swept through the world during World War I. And tragically, they both passed away. And I will go over those details in the mini clips. But it was such a very sad and tragic story, but very deep and intense. These children were chosen by this apparition, this angel, who was very benign to them. And she, the way that the book goes, I actually purchased the book afterwards. The way the book goes, she was such a benign light to them. And they were inspired with this spiritual awareness and the intent to do good. It was a very amazing story. But Lucia, the older cousin, went on to become a nun, and she also had many other visitations. And there are 3 secrets that have been kept concealed for many, many years, many decades, many generations by the Roman Catholic Church. After realizing that the house was the same house that I saw in my dream, I purchased a book, and it was the same black and white picture that I saw in my dream. Guys, this is incredible. I didn't know anything about Fatima. I didn't know anything about Lucia or the other children or the apparition. I only knew that it was a sacred destination and an amazing place for a religious pilgrimage, a spiritual pilgrimage. That's all I knew. I didn't have the details. And there's no way that I could have picked it up subconsciously, because I'd only remotely heard about Fatima in the past, basically from other passengers who were returning to my city from the pilgrimage. And I know I didn't see any photographs, so now I can only gather from this intense experience that was locked inside my memory and my dream, that it, to me, it was my dad trying to communicate with me, and he chose that spot, that destination, perhaps with the help of Lucia and whatever divine powers, whatever other divine powers were available. My father chose to speak to me before the trip, or he wished to communicate a message to me. Now, the message wouldn't have dealt with anything other than but the situation that had been legally unfolding between my mother and I and the executor. And that could only have been what my dad had intended to communicate to us, to be careful. Approximately 6 to 8 months down the road, back at home, my mother, I think it was in the spring, the following spring, my mother claimed to have had a dream where my father visited her and told her to go with legal counsel. And so it is almost as though my Fatima dream was an advanced insight into what was going to be coming next, because even though the business partner was still our executor, many things were happening that were not legal and very confusing, not right. And so I insisted that my mother seek legal counsel, and I told her, you don't have to fight with him, just go and ask questions, get some advice, get informed. Get informed she did, but she relented and relented. She was terrified of being left without any financial aid or any assistance or advice, and I understand that. But at the same time, the law was on our side and not on his. And so what it took for me to convince her, guys, I was going out of my mind. I knew that something had to be done. And it was primarily because of my father's warning in that dream that I had to take responsibility for something that my mother couldn't see yet. And I just knew, that seeking legal counsel was the only way to go. So that is what the Fatima experience and the entire Europe experience, that pilgrimage, that's what it did for me. Hi, I'm back with a second story, and this one is so strange to me. It actually starts a week before the incident that is related to a guardian angel figure. And so it began when it was one of those beautiful October days where the sky was so clear and everything was so bright. You could look out the window and think to yourself, nothing could possibly go wrong on a beautiful day like this. Well, I was wrong, because that's what I thought when I woke up, and it certainly did. Was out and about that day. I remember it being a Friday, and I had a few errands to do. It was in the period following the Thanksgiving in Canada, and everything was so beautiful, guys. The nature was changing. I wanted to be outdoors, and so it wouldn't have mattered what errands I was going to run. I was going to be out. I had gone for a walk and picked up a few groceries, maybe just a couple of items. And I remember driving through a neighborhood that is very close to my old home, a neighborhood not too far from my house. And it's a very classy, upscale neighborhood. And I actually grew up a block from there. And I remember the speed limit is a little lower there. So people are driving at a bit of a slower pace. And I believe that there was quite a bit of construction on other parts of that road. And so I remember driving along. It wasn't a lot of traffic, and it wasn't very late in the afternoon. It was somewhere around 3-ish, 4-ish, and I was on my way back home. And now on the street, there is a fire hall on the right side of the road, going one particular direction, and there is sort of a bridge, a bridge, but not a wooden bridge. It's a bridge that's cement. There's a long sidewalk, and I remember driving quite slowly because I could see up ahead, lying right on the sidewalk, was the figure of what looked to me to be a man lying flat on his face and very still. And I immediately pulled over. There was a space where people could sort of pull over, and I stopped right. Not much traffic at all, but it was quite, on the other hand, it was busy enough that there should not have been a motionless, lifeless figure lying flat on his face and turning, from what I could see when I walked out of my car and went up, he was turning blue. There didn't seem to be any life at all. I didn't touch him, but I could not see any activity, any motion, or any rising and falling of his chest, which was on top of the pavement. Nothing. He didn't flinch, nothing. But I saw a small, faint pool of blood emitting from this area and onto the pavement. It was like a watery kind of blood. And I, for the life of me, could not figure out what happened. I stood there for approximately 20 seconds, 30 seconds, and now I had no SIM card in my cell phone, but I dialed 911, and I quickly told them that I had no SIM card, so they couldn't call me back, but that there was a man lying lifeless on the pavement between this intersection and that intersection on this street. And they were there within a matter of under 5 minutes. People were driving by and not looking, or looking and not stopping. And one female driver, actually pulled up behind me and started making these calls, and it really angered me. It really angered me, not because she was making calls, but because it seemed that she was making a production of stopping and telling the first service people, emergency service people, that she had found this person. And it was very irritating to me, because when other people began to show up, I realized that it was her calling them there, and they weren't emergency people. A ring had formed around me, and I was so irritated. I was very irritated by that, because he had been turning blue. He was already cold. He was already blue. Not that I'd touched him, but do you get my drift? And the woman who pulled up behind me started waving at her friends and saying, "Oh, hi, how are you? Nice to see you again." Yeah, in the same situation. I could not understand that. It sickened me. I was irritated, and I went to my car to wait for emergency services because they asked me to stay behind, and I explained to them that I hadn't seen anything, but that all these people were driving and hustling by and nobody was stopping, and he was apparently already blue, and I began to cry because I was upset that nobody had stopped. Had apparently been eating a takeout meal from the mall that was just up the street, and I don't know why I assumed that. He may not have been a homeless person, but usually people don't eat on the street unless they're in the middle of a lunch break or something. Or he looked like he had been walking quite a distance because the mall was a good 2-3 blocks away and about 3 or 4 traffic lights up. And so he had been walking quite a distance. And my idea was that somebody had come along on a motorpad or a bike or even maybe a vehicle and just knocked them down and continued on their way. Don't know what happened to him. Obviously looked to me that he was wounded. In fact, dead. Person responsible, if any at all, didn't bother to take the precautions necessary and call the proper authorities. Exactly a week later, which was a Friday afternoon, I was returning home from the opposite direction. This time it was 5:30, and I remember the incident occurring right at 5:30. So it was quite a bit later, stuck in traffic, right in front of my residential building. And I know that there was a lot of construction, and we were having the same kind of weather, a beautiful, balmy Friday afternoon in October. It was October, I believe it was October the 22nd. And so, now guys, this was during the pandemic. And so I hadn't been in touch with very many people as of that time. And I had been just basically keeping up with people, you know, by phone and by cards and whatever have you. But I remember being alone that day, and just as I was close to my building where I had to make a turn, I guess you could call this a stunt, a road stunt. Somebody came swerving out onto the roadway, and it was bumper to bumper traffic. So even though I could not have possibly had any image at all of him, I was going the limit. I was going the limit. Let's put it that way. And my light was green. I actually had an arrow, and I was ready to turn at that arrow. Instead, this stunt driver stopped me from turning. And not only did he stop me from turning, he stopped me and my car from moving any further than that. I might add, he was coming out with full force at probably maybe 60 kms an hour, even though I had the right of way. And I checked the next day, and I found that in his spot, even if there was traffic, it's on an uphill. I was approaching from an uphill. I was coming down the hill. He had a perfect vision, a perfect view of all oncoming traffic. regardless of what was in front of him, because I was right up there. And so he had every inkling imaginable that I was on my way. In other words, he saw me and he knew that I was coming. And he decided to proceed anyway at full speed, and he demolished my car. He totaled it. In fact, the last thing that I saw before the impact, even though I slammed on my brakes, I did manage to see him when I got within that a couple of feet or so. That wasn't enough to stop. That wasn't enough space to make a safe stop. I saw that he was laughing. Yeah, he was having a good time. And so, guys, what happened next was that my car, on the impact, began to spin. Spun, and it spun. It spun, and it spun, and it spun. Until my back end hit something. It was basically not a very big collision, but it demolished my car. But the tap itself was incredibly not very strong at all. And I cannot understand that. Even though the left side of my body was kind of in pain, and the officer who showed up he wouldn't let me leave. I had to go to the bathroom, and I explained that I just live here. Can I come right back? I can't. And he said, no, don't you dare leave. Okay, so sick as I was feeling, I declined a visit to the hospital, but there was some blood coming out of my mouth. And guys, I was in shock. I was in shock. I just didn't know what to think or say, so I thought it best not to say anything since I couldn't make heads or tails of what had just happened. However, in the process of spinning, I began to feel overcome with a weird kind of sensation that everything was slowing down. And it was the strangest feeling that I had ever gone through. That when another officer arrived at the scene later, when it was time for my car to be towed, I told her the story of what had happened the week before. And she said, you know, you're very lucky. You could have been killed right on the spot. She said, I don't understand how the other driver was able to hop back into his car and drive away. And you could have been demolished. I said, well, my car was. But anyway, she said, it's incredible that that happened just a week ago. And she says that it's hard for me to believe it. And I said, yeah, it's strange. It's such a strange feeling that exactly a week after this should happen, and I come out of it with barely a mark on me. I cannot imagine how this all came down. So that's the end of that story.